Right, thank you very much everyone for joining us today for today's Lotus launch, The Power of Networks. We are delighted to be joined by several Asia Foundation trustees, members of the Lotus Circle, and special guests. The Lotus Circle, as many of you know, is a vibrant community supporting the Asia Foundation's Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality program. We have a compelling program today about work the Asia Foundation is engaged in to harness the extraordinary power of networks to create new career pathways and to expand economic opportunities for women in Asia. I'm honored to welcome you to today's event and to introduce the Asia Foundation's Senior Director of the Foundation's Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality Program, Jane Sloane. Jane.
Well, thanks very much, John, and thank you everyone for joining today's call. Thank you to Lotus Circle members who are on the call today, and also to our guests for your interest in our work. We're really glad that you can join. The Lotus Circle is a wonderful example of a philanthropic network with a shared goal of advancing women's rights and gender equality in Asia and the Pacific. And in today's program, we're going to explore how various networks are deepening and expanding the impact of the Asia Foundation's work to advance women's rights and opportunities in Asia and the Pacific. We're also hoping to hear from all of you about how networks have influenced your own lives. And so there'll be an opportunity for you to be able to reflect on that later in the call. And in this respect, we have some initial questions for those of you joining. And my colleague Priya has posted the link for you to be able to contribute your response. And so I'll pass over to Priya now, and she'll introduce these questions to you so that we can really hear from all of you about how you see networks in your life.
Hi, everyone. So to open up this separate program called Mentee, I'm going to ask you to please open a separate tab on your computer, or you can open a browser on your phone and type in the code 80914023. And so you can see here at the top, that's MENTI, Mentee.com. And you'll just type in the code 80914023. And you should see this first question, which is, what role have networks played in your career?
So we're seeing career growth as being one response from people, and that I think would also include professional development, the opportunity to be able to learn from colleagues, to be able to get access to new skills and experience, to be able to, of course, benefit from the role that mentors play and coaches play. So I think career growth can represent many different forms of how networks play a powerful role.
We'll just give it one more minute if there's others typing in, or if there's a lag on Mentee and the responses are coming up, to put your responses for this question.
And of course, as I mentioned at the end, here we go. I found mentors that have helped me envision and reach for growth opportunities that I couldn't imagine. Networks have helped to present new job opportunities. They've inspired me in my own thinking. They've expanded my horizons. And I think we'll hear some great examples of that in our discussion with Prelini today as well. So very diverse role that networks have played in the career of those joining this call. So Priya, I think we can move on to the next question.
And then you should see the second question pop up on your screen, which is, what adjectives would you use to describe a strong network of women? I think you have an option to put in 3 adjectives, so please put as little as or as much as you would like.
Hard to limit it to 3. I think there's so many images that come to my mind when I think of a strong network of women. So let's see how you all respond. And as Nikita has said, you can also place your responses in the chat box if you're having difficulty with Menti.
For me, Menti is not really, I don't know if anyone else is having trouble. It's not working to pull up this exact question. So maybe we can have folks put their answers in the chat box.
And again, you know, I think that thinking about a strong network of women means, as John has said, they're loving, caring, bold, strong. I think inspiring, committed, fierce, powerful. So there are a lot of words that come to mind when really thinking about a strong network of women. And of course, as I mentioned, you'll be hearing some great examples from our own work and from Zendesk's work. Powerful, committed, goal-oriented, unstoppable, I would say, in terms of what's able to be achieved. And if any of you want to add anything, stronger together, supportive, bringing the whole tribe along. That's a wonderful description, Cheng-Ling. So yes, and others have said feminist and transformative. So I think there's a lot of objectives there that we can keep in our minds as we go through this discussion today and think again about what networks have made possible for women in Asia and the Pacific, and also how they really inform our own lives. And so with that, I want to now turn to we have a short PowerPoint, and we just really want to be able to capture some of the great examples of our own work with the Asia Foundation, where we're very much invested in supporting and strengthening both women's networks and other diverse networks to be able to accelerate women's empowerment and gender equality. And so, as I mentioned, I'll share a few examples here, and then, of course, I'll be introducing our wonderful guest from Zendesk, Prelini. And please note that we'll also be sharing this PowerPoint after the event so that you've got your own copy of what we're sharing here today. And so this first slide here is of the Women in Tech Network in Cambodia. And Lotus funds have supported the creation of a Women in Tech Network in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. And this network supports an ecosystem of women-led tech startups in Cambodia to be able to grow their businesses and markets. And already this network is having huge success through the growth of these individual businesses and what they can collectively make possible. This second example is called Cetapak in Indonesia, and it's a groundbreaking program supporting women forest defenders and women engaged in land management in Indonesia. And the program supports women to have leadership roles and a collective voice in decisions on land use in local communities. You can see some of the great images there. This next slide is of the Shifting the Power Coalition in the Pacific Islands. And this coalition represents a network of diverse Pacific women who are focused on elevating Pacific women's climate leadership, as well as their leadership on disaster risk management. We created a Power Shift Fund as a flexible fund to be able to support network members to sustain their advocacy and their organising base. A very important role is to really ensure that we're able to invest in the organising base of networks so that they can maintain their advocacy and operations. This next example is from the Philippines. And through a thinking and working politically approach, we supported Filipino women to organise horizontally across religious and faith-based lines to agree on a common agenda for the peace process. And then they also organised vertically to influence policies and politicians and parliamentarians in advocating for a just peace. And so this network of networks approach supported over 50,000 women to lead the peace process in Mindanao and the Philippines. So a very powerful role of this whole approach of scaling up a network with a very bold and powerful goal. And in Sri Lanka, we've supported 33 women's rights organisations in advocating for justice and increasing access to services, including for survivors of domestic violence. And now they're a strong feminist network working collectively for change, as you can see in these images. In Vietnam, we have a program that's focused on enhancing women's political participation. And one of the areas where there's significant underfunding is in women's political leadership. And so in Vietnam, Lotus funds are supporting a women leaders network to support women leaders and potential political candidates to be able to network and to increase their national representation. And this final slide really represents an incredible mapping exercise that we undertook with funding from Zendesk. So we undertook a mapping of women in STEM networks in Asia to identify the imperatives for strengthening these networks and for building a network of networks for women in STEM. My colleague Priya has placed a link to the report that we produced from this mapping in the chat box so that you can access that as well. And this focus is even more important with the impact of COVID. And so it's very timely that we're having a conversation with Prelini from Zendesk today to discuss the power of networks to catalyse transformative change. And so for more information on the projects that I've shared and other program examples from the Asia Foundation and how we're empowering women in Asia and the Pacific, you can also refer to the one-pager in the chat box that Priya has posted so that you've got access to that information. And so with that, I'm now very excited to introduce to you Prelini Udayan-Chiechi, who is the Senior Vice President of Global Marketing at Zendesk, and she's joining us today from London. Zendesk started the customer experience revolution in 2007 by enabling any business around the world to take their customer service online while connecting to more than 100,000 brands with hundreds of millions of customers. And Prelini leads the demand growth, performance and regional marketing, driving growth for Zendesk's business, engaged in more than 160 countries globally. And as a passionate advocate for diversity, equity and inclusion, Prelini is the executive sponsor of Zendesk's Mosaic employee community for people of colour and allies. And she also brings her experience to the community as a mentor, having mentored individuals, charities and Black-owned businesses to support their growth and development. And to learn more about initiatives that Prelini is leading at Zendesk, you can also click on the link that's just been posted in the chat. And so now I'll have a 20-minute conversation with Prelini before opening to a conversation with those of you who are joining the call today. Prelini, it's such a pleasure to be talking with you today. And I want to begin by saying that Zendesk has played such an important role in supporting women in STEM networks, including this funding of the mapping of women in STEM networks in Asia that I mentioned earlier. Why is this focus on strengthening networks so crucial? And how do tech companies, including Zendesk, benefit from women's STEM networks?
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Jane, and it's lovely to meet everyone here today. It was great to see some of the great work the Asia Foundation is doing across the globe. Just seeing what's taking place in Phnom Penh, the Pacific Islands, in Vietnam with political, so just it's amazing work. Thank you so much for the work that you're continuing to do. I just want to acknowledge, as we're so close to International Women's Day and the theme is around gender equality for sustainable tomorrow, different regions have also got different themes such as breaking the bias. I wanted to share what it means to me. And it means a world that is diverse, equitable and inclusive, a world where difference is celebrated, and a world where we strive to really make changes in societal thinking, where we forge a path for much more inclusive societies for future generations. A lot of the work that you're all doing is a great example of that. And the investment in STEM is also another great example of this. So for us, there's 3 areas why STEM investment is super important. The first is around retention and advancement of underrepresented talent. So internal STEM networks, such as employee communities, bring a culture of inclusion to life. Employees feel seen and valued and have an internal community of allies to really lean in throughout their career journey. These communities also help amplify the voices of underrepresented talent, where challenges do arise and change is needed. As an example for that, this is something Jane touched upon during Covert. You think about a lot of caregivers needed to change and be there for their families. Things that Zendesk did do was expand our caregiver benefits. We had many areas that were taking place across the changes of the organization when we think of Black Lives Matters and other areas. And for us, we had empathy circles where people could come together and really talk about what was happening. The second area is around hiring. So really supporting and engaging with external STEM networks allows us to plug into key talent that might not otherwise come to us through traditional hiring or sourcing channels. We partner with external organizations to ensure that we're tapping into top talent for backgrounds. Examples for this is in the US, there's a Mums Project, there's the Lesbians Who Tech, Breakline, and there's Black Young Professionals network that we work with across Europe as well. And then the last area is around culture. So at Zendesk, inclusion is one of our top values, and I shared it was something that I was so passionate about as well. So networks are essential to bringing that value to life. Really, do all our employees feel seen? Do they feel valued? Do they feel respected? Do they have the support to really progress in their careers? Formal and informal networks which drive visibility and create that connection across the organization is what makes this value really come to life. And so that's just some of the areas that we're helping with on the STEM side.
Wow, that's so impressive, Prelini. And I think there's a lot of points there that you've made that would really resonate with those on the call. You mentioned breaking the bias and also representing underrepresented talent. And I think with women being on the front lines of impact from COVID as caregivers, as first responders, also recognising that they're best placed to be able to develop the strategies and solutions in the longer term and in this recovery period. And of course, those in STEM fields play such a critical role in that regard. And also what you mentioned about culture as being so critical in challenging gender norms and bias as well, and creating those connections. And I think that is one of the most valuable roles for networks in creating, forging, sustaining those connections. And so I think you've shared a lot that's very rich and so resonant for what we're thinking about with networks today. One of the things that we know is that diverse internal networks in organisations can be a game changer for women's leadership and advancement. You've touched on some of this already, but perhaps you could just expand on how Zendesk cultivates diverse staff networks, and also what have been some of the results of that cultivation process?
That's a great question. So at Zendesk, we have 8 employee communities that focus on women, people of colour, veterans, multi-generational, caregivers, women in engineering, LGBTQ. It's all really to create safe spaces for our employees to connect and network based on their shared experiences. You shared, in the bio that I'm the executive sponsor of the Mosaic community. So it's really about people of color and allies to embrace and celebrate the differences. And so programs from the Mosaic community that we've run is something called peer circles. And in those peer circles, we've given the community an opportunity to have direct engagement with the most senior leaders across the top of their company around topics that really matter to them. We've had our senior vice president for our general counsel actually talk to employees on how to negotiate. We've had our CMO have topics on how to build a personal brand. We've had leaders talk about how do you balance work and life, work and professional and personal life together? Like, how do you get all those different areas? I've spoken about topics on how do you break the mold and navigate the double bind. So it's really helping our employees to have that connection and to help them really on their employee growth, career growth itself. We've had development programs like Zendesk Ignite, which is for underrepresented talent, which I referenced, and it provides also a global mentoring and professional development to support their careers. Employees become part of a shared development experience, and it's really bringing them together in a learning cohort that's part of their professional network. So it helps them with additional core skills that they've learned. I've personally, in my organization, I have about 250 employees in my team, and I've had a number of employees participate in both of the programs, and it's been so rewarding to see their growth and development, along with the relationships that they've actually formed with peers outside of their everyday circle. They think differently, they bring more diversity in thought and shared experiences through these interactions that they have. So across Zendesk, we encourage all our employees to participate in the communities, but separately offer up other opportunities on the ways that employees can participate, whether that's through Slack channels. We actually have thought leadership events. There was one last week that we held, which was around wellness, and we actually had meditation come through, and it was about embracing women's bodies, didn't matter about the size and other areas. So there's a lot that we run from a company perspective, which is also different to the communities as well.
Well, again, very rich sharing there, and so much that you've shared, I think, certainly resonates with me, and I'm sure with others as well. You've spoken about the diversity of networks and approach, and also of that experience and how that plays out with both peer circles and peer learning. And I think that that is just so valuable, that it's also not a one-way relationship with mentoring, that it is very much often that shared learning as a mentee and a mentor that happens. And of course, in terms of what you've mentioned about peer learning, it is that sense of being stronger together in terms of not only what you can learn, but then what you can advocate for and represent. And I think with what you've shared about the global mentoring that Zendesk undertakes, it sounds like there's an incredibly strong commitment to that kind of learning cohort and that skills creation and development as well. And you've also mentioned the diversity of different channels that staff can tap into, so that there's a variety of different ways in which they can continue to learn and to feel like they're having that kind of immersion experience in different networks as well, as a way to be able to elevate their thought leadership. And I think that that's so crucial at a time where, as you mentioned before, we're facing so many challenges, and particularly in terms of the multiple caregiving responsibilities that so many staff are facing at this time. There's often an erosion of confidence that goes with that. And so I think networks at the moment are also playing a really important role in not just the skill building, but in bolstering that confidence and that sense of feeling heard and represented as well. So really kudos to you, Prelini, for what Zendesk is making possible. Zendesk is also supporting work focused on mentoring networks for women to support their confidence and skill building and positioning for leadership roles. Would you be able to share a story of what this has meant for the women involved? I think
Definitely.
Making it personal always makes a difference.
Definitely. Well, I'm actually going to share, this is a really good story that was shared with me, and I'm going to share a quote that was actually by an employee that's been recently promoted, this promotion cycle. And she said, like, this is for the Ignite program. She said, it really meant everything to me. It meant we were seen and we were heard, and there were proper steps taken internally to help equip us as women and underrepresented talent to have the professional development conversations with our managers, with leaders and executives. The Ignite program for her personally helped her look at her personal self, not just her professional self. The program helped equip her for real life conversations that she needed to have in order to get to that next step of her career. And once there, she was able to take the next steps through the mentoring piece of the program. It helped her understand what she needed and the conversations that she needed to have. So it was a great program when she looked at it introspectively, but also in reflection against the goals that she needed to achieve. We've had Better Up coaching in the organization. The Better Up coaching, I've had 3, we nominate people, top talent on our team to attend these programs. In the Better Up coaching, I've had 3 mid to senior level women participate. And I've just seen enormous growth and development for them. So their coaches work with us as leaders and we attend the session. So one of my leaders I've attended where we usually will start off with positive reinforcements at the start. I'll share what the individual's doing really well. They'll talk about the progress and development and we work through a lot of this together. And what it's really meant, it's these women have developed, they've just become more empathetic, more open and really embraced both networking, but so much more that it's okay to be a woman leader and be able to have those differences as well. And we don't have to do things a certain way. And just overall from myself, like as a person of color in quite a senior leadership role across the organization, I do get a lot of employees across the organization, both women and men of just diverse backgrounds, but in particular women of all different ages that will reach out and just say, it's so nice to see women in leadership roles. It's an inspiration. I think the more we have that, the more employees are going to embrace it because people see what is an opportunity for them. If someone can reach that, then that's an opportunity. So at Zendesk, we're just starting to see the impact of what we're doing in terms of these programs. But during this last cycle in promotions, we had over 500 employees across the company. We track that by female promotions as well, but we're seeing an increasing number of females that are really becoming mobilized across the organization, teams and departments and successes as taking part of these programs as well.
Well, I think that what you've shared, Prelini, about the importance of, if you can see it, you can be it, is just so crucial. And being able to see diverse leaders and how they're leading is just such an important, it's an important example for so many young women, particularly in terms of realizing what they can become. And also what you mentioned before about women, how women lead and understanding the qualities that really can define a leadership as well is, I think, really important, that you don't have to model often a more rigid form of leadership, that you can actually still be true to yourself in the way that you lead. And I think that's something that, in terms of reflecting that sense of if you can see it, you can be it, at the Asia Foundation through our Books for Asia program, we've been working with a lot of young people, including girls and young women, to be able to create books that they're involved in so that they can see characters that represent what they aspire to be in their lives, including in STEM fields. And I know Gina Davis has, through her network, has done some incredible work in elevating characters of girls and young women and women in leadership roles in the media, to be able to ensure that girls have access to more diverse role models and leaders in terms of what they aspire to. So I think the work that you're doing is incredibly important. And as you referenced earlier, equipping women for real life conversations through that approach as well. One of the other things I want to touch on is, that the data is very clear that increasing gender diversity and inclusion leads to increased revenue as well as greater workforce retention. So there's a very strong business case for really focusing on diversity, equity and inclusion. While we know that women-only networks are force multipliers for STEM fields to recruit and retain women, is there also a role for male champions of women's STEM leadership to play a role here as well? I mean, I think I know the answer is yes, but if so, in what ways do you think that men can play that role in championing women's STEM leadership?
Perfect. That's a great question. I'm actually going to answer that. I just want to touch on very quickly on something you said. When I spoke about, how do we make society change? If we see it just even in our generation today, Hollywood, like think about the Disney films, the characters that we have, it is all changing. So we are going through this enormous change across society, which is awesome to see. But back to the question on STEM and the roles that men can play. Yes, they can play a very crucial role. And it's important for men to advocate for women to both enter STEM fields, but also progress in their STEM careers. I've seen it with my colleagues, whether it's heading up sales, whether it's heading up engineering, they are massive advocates for females entering the professional because there's not as many females in many of these areas. But visibility is key. And given their representation in STEM, men often serve as gatekeepers or influencers for their female colleagues. The choices that they make in the hiring, the developing, and the promotions can either exacerbate the problem or to work to change the landscape. They need to really be advocating for female colleagues when they're not in the room. And I find I have many male leaders that do that for me, where they are constantly advocating. Zendesk is amazing like that across the board. So they need to make sure that their female colleagues are included in key conversations and decision-making. And it's not just a seat at the table, but they have an equal voice at the table as well. They also need to ensure that they're hiring, slates and succession plans have got diversity and include multiple women as part of it. So the volume of women considered for roles directly influences the probability for the women that were actually going to be hired. I personally have seen this change in so many areas of our business, and I'm going to touch on one particular area, which is the go-to-market functions, and in particular sales, coming from the marketing background, working with sales. And this has predominantly been men in many leadership positions. I remember 5-10 years ago, I'd be the only female amongst 10 white men effectively in rooms. And it's not like that anymore. Like, just to see the change and diversity is just phenomenal. But what's really allowed for that is the men advocating for the change, the people that they're interviewing, as we spoke about, but they actually embrace and support and see the value that actually women are bringing to the table as well. It's positively impacting performance. It's the culture. We think that we see stress levels very different at end of quarter now, the way we plan for the future, the empathy that's brought into deals and deal cycles. So men have been a huge advocate for this, and that's what's helping this change as well for men that are investing in this particular area, and in particular leaders as well.
Thank you. I think all you've shared is just so important. And I think that this focus on engaging men and boys as allies is so important. I think that the He for She campaign is a great example of that. So is the Champions for Change program that has been taken up in a number of different countries. And I think, challenging rigid forms of masculinities is also really important, so that we're able to I think that this idea that it's just men advocating for gender equality doesn't really do justice to men's ability to realize that by advocating for diversity, equity and inclusion, they're also better off, because they can also assume different forms of leadership in the way that you were talking about earlier, with women feeling free to identify their own and feel comfortable with their own form of leadership, and men feeling that they have the latitude to do that too, is really going to be a game changer, I think, in terms of what we're striving for with gender equality globally. And so I think there's a great opportunity to do that. With the Asia Foundation, we've been supporting a gender lab in India, really reimagining masculinities, and it's an incredibly strong network that they're undertaking with schools and with local communities. And so I think this work of engaging men and boys in the way that you've described, and through our own work at the Asia Foundation, is incredibly powerful. So I now want to bring it back to a personal perspective again, and to ask you, Prelini, about some of the challenges that you've faced in your own career and how women's networks have supported you. You mentioned before that a lot of people, particularly I would imagine younger women, look to you as a role model in terms of what you've achieved at Zendesk and more broadly through your career. But what are some of the challenges that you've had to face to get to the point that you're at now?
I think a couple of areas I'm going to touch on. The first is navigating the double bind. I'd say that has been the biggest challenge, because as women, the higher up you rise, we're expected to be a certain way, and the expectation, if you come across as too strong, you're effectively you lack empathy. If you have too much of empathy, you're being too soft. All of those elements come across, and it's really striking that balance. And I've just learned authentic leadership and being true to yourself is so super critical, because over time, people are going to discover who you are, whether you are positive in nature all the time. It's not that you're disingenuous, you are just a happy person, and you are always looking for the bright side, and it's okay, and continue to believe in yourself to do that. It's okay to share that vulnerability. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned is vulnerability is key, because if you can share that vulnerability and not coming across as perfect, I think people are quick to form opinions of women in power positions that it must be for X, Y, and Z that they're in that position. I know for myself, it has been, unfortunately, I wasn't blessed with any children, but I was blessed with a happy marriage and a wonderful family and colleagues and loved ones, etc. So I feel very blessed of what I have in my life, but there was a lot of opinions on why I didn't have children. And so I think people make those choices and they don't know the personal circumstances of someone behind that. So for me, what's really helped me is I took part in 2 women leadership programs. One was actually at Wharton Business School in 2015, and one was at Yale Business School in 2020. And just the relationships of women that I formed in terms of networks, they really helped me navigate the double bind. They navigated through the career, that challenges we were having. You could reach out and talk to these women. That week that I spent with them were lifetime relationships that we formed. And years later, we still reach out. And even if you haven't spoken to them for years, you can talk to them about a problem that you have. So I think those relationships and the networks are so powerful that you should definitely forge and keep those. The second is former bosses that I've had that have really remained great mentors to me. They really believed and they encouraged me to lean in. And I do that a lot with a lot of women, and I'd encourage all of you to do that. It's like, how do we lean in more and how do we encourage women to lean in more across the board? So I had one particular leader where she'd asked me to go for a CMO position. And my first thing was, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I don't know enough about engineering and I don't know about this area of the business. And she's like, well, you can learn that. You don't need to know everything, you can learn it. And and I said, oh, I don't have board experience. She's like, well, why don't you get a board position? So that really helped me. And then I got my first board position 2 months later, because it was through her encouragement. And again, female bosses in the past, I still stay in touch with them, and they've massively helped me in my career. But it's also been male bosses that have advocated for the change as well. A former CEO, when I, in 2012, had joined a company, he sat me down and he said, hey, Prelini, you've done a great job internally building your profile, but I want you to spend the next few years building your external profile. Like, how do you encourage and help others, not just internally, externally? So there are many men champions out there, because they've got daughters, they've got sisters, they've got wives, they're experiencing that, and they want to help that next generation as well, which is absolutely amazing. And then the last is just networks, and it doesn't necessarily have to be women's networks, but it's networks for disciplines that you're coming from. So for myself, like being in a lot of marketing networks, there was something 2 weeks ago about the top 22 people in innovation, and it was a list that had more males on there than there was females. But what was really rewarding was to see some of these male counterparts over the years that I've been on panels, etc. with. They were encouraging and they were praising that they were so happy to be included, but they were calling out myself as a female with 4 or 5 different other males. And so just to be able to see that change and building these networks with them, it's taken years to cultivate that. It's taken years of different panels and conversations in the industry to even be included on their LinkedIn posts, but that perseverance pays off. And just not to give up, like in whatever you do, like keep that authentic, true to yourself, who you are, your leadership, your style, because eventually that will come to fruition in the right time and people will recognize that.
Wow, that is so inspiring. Look, there's so much that you shared there that was just so rich. You know, your experience with Wharton and with Yale, and I think that speaks to the importance of professional development opportunities like that. And also, I would say joining fellowship programs, and we have within the Asia Foundation Asian Development Fellows, and they also form a kind of a lifelong cohort in being able to tap into opportunities. And what you said about leaning in, and thanks to, you know, I think all of the women and men who have encouraged us to lean in, and also believing in us and what we can make possible. And, you know, you mentioned also the opportunity or the encouragement to take on a board position. And I think, again, that's something that I encourage so many young women to think about early in their lives, and to get the training to also assume not just board positions in NGO communities, but on corporate boards as well, because it's just such great training for the time ahead. And you also mentioned a male manager encouraging you to build your external profile, which I think is just fantastic, to have that kind of encouragement and recognition of you as a whole person in terms of what's needed to be able to elevate your leadership. With what you said about the number of men on lists and, you know, awards and panels and so on, it's also, I think, been really encouraging to see a number of men saying that they'll only join a panel if there is a woman on that panel, and, you know, diverse representation on the panel. And so I think that that's also a really great strategy to ensure that we're advocating for equity through our own leadership and everyday lives. And I think what you said about persistence, you know, nevertheless, she persisted. I think we can really take that to heart in terms of recognising that we need to be there for the long game in terms of what we're invested in terms of women's rights and gender equality, and the diverse leadership is really going to help us in that vision for what we can make possible in the time ahead. So thank you so much for this really rich conversation. That ends our formal conversation, and I know that Nikita has been encouraging everyone to ask questions. In the meantime, we've got an initial question that's come through that I'll ask you to respond to, Prelini. How has COVID and a remote or hybrid work environment impacted women of colour and the power of networks more generally?
That is an excellent question. The COVID has affected everyone. I think it's really put everyone on an equal standing more than ever before. And I think where it's put everyone on equal standing is when we had some people in the office and some people remote dialing in. We were never equal in the conversations that you were having, because the people that were in the remote environment were always the second-class citizens, I guess, in listening to the sounds and everything else. But COVID has really put that even keel that we've all come to the table together, where we're starting off the same. I think what it has encouraged and helped, and depending on how people have embraced it, is giving the opportunity for people to shine in different ways that they might not have necessarily been able to shine, and shine in different ways in the way that they've connected with their colleagues, the work that they've undertaken, working in a time or time zones that have worked for them. So I remember reading this book about morning larks and night owls. In our pre-COVID world, the world was really set up for employees that were morning larks, that would get to the office at 8, 9 o'clock and finish at 5, and you were at your most creative styles during that time. But the night owls were the ones that really never persevered and were as successful in that environment, whereas the night owls have really started to shine during this time. So for me, what I've really seen in this space, it's giving the opportunity to see more people prosper across all different diverse backgrounds and across different genders. I truly believe it's put us more on more of an even keel than we've ever seen before.
Thanks so much. That's I think there's just so much to consider there in terms of the way that we work, and also I think awareness of different work styles, and as you say, the preferences, whether being morning larks or night owls. And just again, I think we have we have an opportunity to reimagine our workplaces, and therefore to really reimagine how we network as well. And you know, I think it's a great opportunity for us to step into these new spaces now. Another question that's just come through: where do you see opportunities for strengthening networks of women entrepreneurs? Which is, of course, a very strong focus of the Asia Foundation's work to advance gender equality. You know, I think that women entrepreneurs face a number of barriers, both in terms of not just access to mentoring, but more access to coaching, opening those doors to be able to make those new business opportunities possible, access to finance, access to new business opportunities and markets. So where do you think we need to pay more attention in terms of supporting networks of women entrepreneurs to succeed?
I think there's been, again, more opportunities during COVID that has come out, and more foundations that have been created to help the entrepreneurs, and in particular women, with a greater focus on International Women's Day, about diversity, equitable societies and inclusion. We're starting to see that focus, that many organizations today that are offering up funding, that are offering up places on boards or other places, they're looking for that diversity. They're looking for an equal number of males and females that are included. So I think if anything right now, it's looking and not being afraid to join the networks that are out there, join those programs, because in many cases you're going to find these companies probably have a target or data set of the balance that they do need to receive, and do need to have that balance, not being afraid to go. And even asking those organizations, of do they have a set quota of how many they need to split between a male and female, so they can understand where they actually stand when they're applying for those grants, or where they're applying for that sponsorship or support.
Absolutely. I think one of the other areas, of course, is the whole area of green STEM for women, women entrepreneurs. And so a focus on recycling and green energy and waste management. And that's one of the things that we're focused on at the Asia Foundation, is supporting women in to be able to be part of those green supply chains. And one of the things that COVID has done, of course, has been to create more kind of smaller supply chains across multiple locations, so that companies mitigate risk. So if one supply chain is hit because of a pandemic or because of climate change, they can pivot to another, which in many ways gives women entrepreneurs many more opportunities to engage in those supply chains. But I think, again, it comes back to women having access to the networks, the confidence, the markets, to be able to make those opportunities possible. So, you know, I hope that we can work more closely with Zendesk to be able to support the work that we're undertaking to advance those opportunities for women entrepreneurs.
And also, just two things around both of the questions that you asked, Jane. The first is, I feel women have really had the opportunity to shine in the last 2 years because of the working style. Like, a lot of women are primary caregivers and they're looking after children. They haven't really had that opportunity career-wise because they've had to do school drop-offs, pickups, etc. But in this world of flexibility, they've been able to work around their schedule. And when the kids have gone to bed, they've been able to work and get what they've needed to do. So I think it's put females at a different level. But also in the creative and innovative minds of a lot of females, they've come up with great ideas where they've saw gaps in the marketplace during this time. And they say the best ideas do come in times of crisis. And so these ideas, and more entrepreneurs are coming out during this time because they're seeing the gaps in the marketplace of their experiences as parents, as women, as workers or employees. And hence we're seeing many people also leave the workforce to go create their own businesses or create a lifestyle change to say, this is what I want to do, and this is the future of what that looks like.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing about women's experience of caregiving, because it's so complex, it's, you know, childcare, it's elder care, it's caring for family members with disabilities. And, you know, I think it's been exhausting for so many women to have to manage careers as well as manage the caregiving responsibilities. But what we're finding is that there's a new openness, at least with some governments in Asia, to translate that experience of what women need to new childcare policies, new policies to really focus on the caring economy, and to embed that in policies and laws that really represent the kind of diversity and opportunities that women particularly need possible, but also men to be able to share, you know, caring responsibilities. And so I think it's the translation of women's personal experience during COVID and the opportunity to be able to advocate, including through networks, to be able to realise the level of change that we know has to happen for women to be a part of the kind of the recovery period of COVID and what we can see in the time ahead. Another question that's come through, and I'm conscious of not having too much time left. Are you seeing internal or external networks coalescing around issues like climate change and environmental protection, sustainable farming? Is COVID particularly creating new opportunities to coalesce these networks rather than them being as siloed as perhaps they were previously?
500%. We're seeing that across the board in so many areas as we've made the decisions as a company. Sustainability, as an example, when we think about on the marketing side, how we used to do events, we're thinking about it very differently. In Silicon Valley, we're talking to other tech companies that we probably wouldn't have been speaking at the different levels to have those discussions, to think about new ways of working, new ways of doing things. So I think COVID has definitely opened up more discussion groups than ever before. 2 weeks ago, I was on a session, again, similar, on ABM's coming up. Some people are thinking, how do we go back to face-to-face and not face-to-face, and what are companies doing? And you're really leaning in and listening to your networks and peers so much more than ever before to help guide you. It's like, this is what we're thinking about it. What are you thinking about doing? So I think COVID has allowed us, there was always networking before, but it's allowed much more open sharing and much more openness in the discussions that are taking place, because everyone's in a similar situation as we're figuring it out, as we went into COVID, but also as we're coming out of what that new future looks like.
And what do you think is needed now, you know, in terms of, everyone is talking about, I don't think the phrase build back better really does justice to the level of transformation that's needed in a post pandemic environment. But what do you think are the real opportunities in terms of what you've said about coalescing networks? Where do you see the true opportunities in terms of that broader vision of realising women's rights and gender equality in the time ahead?
I think it gives us an opportunity to think differently, not to go back to the way that things were or the path that we'd carved out. This is the way things were going to be. COVID's really it's shaken up the way that we thought about society, the way that we should conduct business. You touched on it earlier, Jane, when we spoke about the hours of working. Who would have ever thought 2 years ago that the majority of companies going back full-time work will be 1 to 2 days a week, and we're not going back full-time? That just didn't exist. Who would have ever thought for 18 months employees were going to be working from home full-time remotely? Sectors such as the financial services never even used to allow their employees to leave the office before 5 o'clock or work from home for a day, and yet everyone was forced into this new world of working. And so, to your point, in this new way, it's created adaptation. It's given, we speak about women, but it's giving them greater opportunities, greater seat at the table to think differently, because it's that diversity in thought that's coming through. Like, women have an amazing idea because they're experiencing it. And what are you actually bringing to the table? So I think, if anything, it's helped our more innovation. It's probably propelled us forward 5 to 10 years in some of the ideas that probably would have come later. But technology's come, we've learned to use technology in different ways, the way we service customers, the way, think about delivery. When we were working from home, we were able to get everything delivered from home, and we've changed how we go to the retail sector to shop today. Think about what we were doing just in terms of how we used interaction spaces when we went into the office. It was, we'd go sit at our desk and work. Now it's more thoughtful. We're going in, and when we are going in, it's more for collaboration purposes. So I think it has propelled us, and it's created greater opportunities for those that are embracing it as part of that open sharing, because everyone does want to help each other to move forward. So we are thinking, but there are some companies that have just gone back to the way it was, and that small percentage hasn't made that evolution. But those small companies that have gone back are going to be forced to move ahead, because there's many others, a greater percentage of the 90% is not going back. And so it's a positive change for the future.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that accompanying that, what does need to happen is that investment in those diverse networks, in women's networks, particularly shifting not only power and voice, but also resources to where there are those opportunities to elevate those networks and to invest in incredible work. I know with the mapping that we did of the Women in STEM networks, those Women in STEM networks are doing phenomenal work, and you can just imagine what they're able to achieve if they had more funding to be able to not only drive that work individually, but collectively. And so I think that's where the Lotus Circle and Lotus Funds play such a powerful role, because we're able to pilot new programs, we're able to sustain good work, we're able to adapt that work across multiple countries, and we're able to leverage that funding with other funding from public and private sector donors. And so the resource mobilisation that's possible with a powerful network is really incredible and unstoppable, to use an earlier word. So I want to circle back to really acknowledge all of the Lotus advisors and guests who are on this call today, as well as just to thank you so much, Prelini, for such a rich and valuable conversation. I mean, your talent, your expertise, your worldview, your leaning in has just made this such an incredible conversation. And we're very grateful to you for your time today and for sharing so much of your own experience so generously. So I know that we're almost at time now. And so I think at this point, I might, unless there's anyone who would like to share anything about your own experience of networks, and I have been monitoring the chat box, I might pass over to my colleague Nikita to be able to make some closing remarks in relation to our conversation today.
Thank you, Jane. Just giving it another minute to see if there's anyone that wanted to make a comment or if they had a question from our Lotus Circle advisors and their friends joining in today. And please feel free as we're closing, if you're comfortable enough, to turn on your camera so that we can see each other and greet hello and goodbye. But as I don't see anything coming through just now, I'm Nikita Desai. I'm the Associate Director for East Coast Philanthropy for the Asia Foundation in New York. I want to thank Jane and Prelini for the wonderful discussion that was so inspiring to me. You know, one of the best things about the Asia Foundation is the philanthropy network that we've built through the Lotus Circle and the fuel funds that we're able to garner to do really innovative programming across Asia Foundation offices. And it's so inspiring to see how flexible funds can really leverage private sector and public sector funds. So, you know, it's our own ways that we're impact investing, if you will, throughout Asia through our women's empowerment programs. So we just want to make a quick plug. Our annual fundraising event, the Lotus Leadership Awards, will take place on April 6th in New York City, in person at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. We have gone virtual last 2 years, so we're really excited to reunite in person this year. We hope that you'll attend or support the event. Megan, my colleague, will drop the link where you can register for the program. This year we're honoring 3 extraordinary honorees. We're honoring Rishma Sajani, who's the founder of Girls Who Code. She's also created a Marshall Plan for Moms. Her new book is coming out, which is all about equality in pay. We're also honoring G-Star Denim Foundation, GSRD Foundation, who has been a key partner for the Asia Foundation since 2013. And we're also honoring Cape, who's another local Cambodia partner for the Asia Foundation in administering and helping us make our Girls Scholarship Program so successful. So the theme of the event is really economic empowerment for women, STEM education for girls to level the playing field. And so we really hope that you'll support and join. If you have any questions, please, contact any one of us. And with that, I guess I'll close, unless John or Jane, if you have any other announcements or if anything I missed, please feel free to jump in here.
No, thank you very much, and wanted to thank Chingling Chen for the idea of having this session today and having it on what, at least in Japan, is Girls' Day. So it's a very appropriate day, and we're coming up on International Women's Day as well. So we'll be sharing the recording of this session, which I think was so rich and so full of wonderful inspiration. So we'll be sharing that far and wide, and wanted to thank our partners at Zendesk for helping us put this event together. And thank you, Jane, for emceeing and steering the conversation in really some exciting directions.
Thank you, Chengling, so much for inspiring this session, and it's so lovely to see everyone's faces on the screen as well. Really want to honour our Lotus advisors and their guests who joined us today, as well as Asia Foundation colleagues. So thank you very much, and particularly to Prelini and to your colleagues as well from Zendesk for making this possible, and particularly Erin, also on the call. Your involvement and your partnership in supporting our work has been so crucial in our being able to have this conversation today. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your evening, morning. Bye.
Everyone.